Hey, what's up everybody? RJ here. Today we're back with part 3 of converting a landing page design into fully functional code. Now, if you missed the last episode, part 2, we essentially just made this HTML file, filled it out. We currently have this nice looking landing page. It's not responsive yet. And we have this CSS file that we've filled out pretty well. Now, in this episode, which is going to be our final third part, we are going to be linking another page when you click on some of the nav options. We're going to be making the landing page responsive. So what we do want in terms of responsiveness is when we move from a 1920 by 1080p, which is a desktop resolution, and we go to an iPad Pro. Right now, this image shows. We don't want this image just showing, especially for phone. We don't want the image showing. We want this content to be showing and our image to be gone. So we're going to be implementing that through the use of media queries. And lastly, we're going to be adding a little animation to our button. So let's get started. The first thing that we're going to be doing today is tackling the responsiveness. So first things first, we can see here if we go into the responsive tab and we move this over, that our image is in front of our content. Now, to fix this, it's fairly simple. All we need to do is just add a z-index of 1 right in our container. Our container is surrounding this entire content area over here. So by doing that and refreshing, our content is now going to be in front. Now, something else we also need to do is to kind of blend it in more, we want to have a white background. So we'll add background color, just going to be white, or we could just use a hex color of FFF, which is white. You can refresh that, and awesome. This looks a lot better. This is what I was intending when I designed this. One thing that is missing though is if we move this over to the left, you can see the bottom area is not white. So what we're going to need to do is add a height. Now, for this specific design, I'm just going to add the height of the actual image here, roughly, and that's going to be 11 to 7 pixels. Cool. So we refresh one more time now. This is exactly what we're looking for, other than this is where the responsiveness comes in. So now that we've added this background, we can tackle the media queries. And media queries are essentially going to tell our website / application, hey, when the width of the screen is less than a certain width or greater than a certain width, do this. So to create this, we're going to do a max width of 1200 pixels. So this is a media query specifically just for anything below 1200 pixels. And what we can do here is we can target our subheading class. So we have our subheading class up here, and we're basically saying when the screen gets below 1200 pixels, we want to do this to the subheading class. And what we want to do is we want to make the width 100%. So you'll quickly notice after we do the subheading and the content that our design fully becomes responsive and it looks great. So you'll see two of our widths there. And then the last thing that we want to do is we don't want to see the snowboarder image. We have the class up here, and we can easily remove that by just saying snowboarder display none. So just to go over this one more time, this max width of 1200 pixels, anything under 1200 pixels, these values, these CSS values, will be basically active for these classes. Anything above 1200 pixels, for example, with the subheading, 532 pixels will be used. So this width will not override this width until we are under 1200 pixels. So I hope that's clear. Now, if we refresh this and we go to iPad Pro, we now have a nice looking full screen content. Same with the iPad. And I kind of like to just flip through all those because it gives a really good accurate representation of like what we're going to see on each device, but you can also do this as well. So you can see how it moves and scales down. So it looks awesome. And that's exactly what we are intending. Now, lastly, we are going to be editing the button, and we're going to want the button to look fairly animated. We don't want anything too crazy. And let me make this a little bit, let me fit that. Cool. Or actually make it a little bit bigger. I want to make sure everybody can see properly. Adjust that to the window and I'll move this over. Great. Now, right now when we hover over this, nothing happens. And what we want to happen is just a little bit of animation. So our Explore right now is a div, and it's surrounding this entire button. So we want to target that, and we're going to use a hover to do so. So we're going to say for whatever element has this Explore class, and if we hover over it, so we use this hover, and we can say do something or change the CSS when we hover. So we're going to change the color of the text to the red that we've been using throughout this, which is FA1616. We're going to change the border. Actually, we don't need to change the border color. I was going to say make it red, but I think that would be too much. So let's keep that the same, because what I envision here is our arrow moving to the right and our Explore text turning red. So by adding this Explore hover here, the first thing that will happen is if we save this and we hover over, you'll see, well, it's actually not active when we're in this kind of mode. But if we now make it here, which is actually a better visual for you guys anyway, our text turns red. Awesome. One thing that I am going to do right now is change our cursor to a pointer. So it gives our user a little bit more, hey, like there is a button here, and it changes our pointer. So now that we have the color, we are also going to add a transition, which basically just smooths the transition between whatever's happening. So we can do all, which says if any of our CSS changes on this hover, animate it. Or to be more specific, if you don't want to use all, you can target the CSS that you're changing. You can say on the transition of this color, take 0.2 seconds, and then we're going to add an ease in and ease out. So cool. Now, next, we want to change the arrow. Currently, we do not have an arrow ID or class set on here. So in order to animate this, we're going to have to do that. I'm just going to use a class, and I'm just going to name it arrow. You can also use an ID. And we're going to come here. We're going to have arrow. And on this arrow, we are going to actually set a transition as well. And this transition is going to be for the transform. So we're going to add a transform to this arrow class, and that's going to be on the animation. So when we hover over it, we're going to transform it to the right, essentially. Now we can say transform, or I'm sorry, yep, transform 0.2 seconds, and then ease in, ease out. Now we can come down here and we're going to be using a selector for explore. And it's basically going to say, when we're hovering over explore, target this specific class. So we're going to be targeting arrow when explore is hovered over. And this is where that transform is coming into play. We're going to translate this 10 pixels to the right and translate X 10 pixels to the right. And not only this, but we're going to set the opacity to 0. So this is a good quick change right here that we're going to make. We don't just want to target the transform anymore. So when we're moving this arrow over to the right, I want a slow fade to opacity 0. So I want it to go from 1 to 0 over 0.2 seconds. And I also want it to move over 0.2 seconds. So this is a good use of all. And lastly, we are going to be adding a transition to this. So I can quickly explain why we have to add 2 transitions. Now, this transition right here, I believe will just be active for when we hover over it initially. And this transition here will be active when we release our hover. So, and we can test that out. So if we do this and we hover, awesome, our arrow goes to the right, unhover, arrow goes to the left. Now let's see if we remove this. It's a little testing. Okay, cool, so that works. And that's awesome because now we have one less line of CSS. So that covers both of our bases there. So now this is exactly what was intended. We hover over this explore, it turns red, arrow moves to the right, great. Now let's move to the on clicks now. Since everything visual is done for this landing page, we can now move to some other fun things. I've created this home page, super simple. It's basically the same thing, just an empty body, other than a box that I put in here with homepage text. So what we're going to use this for is just an example for our nav bar. And since we're using an A tag, we can use an href, and it's this easy. So if we click on the home, right, we want to navigate to our home page. Now, since we have this home HTML page, we want to link the two. So all we need to do is say home.html, and it's that easy. There are a couple of things we need to change styling-wise, but if we click on this, we are now at our home page. So we can go back, and we'll change up the styling real quick. So for the styling, let's move up and let's find the nav item. Cool. There are 2 things I believe that we are going to need to change. It's going to be text decoration, which is going to be none. And it's also going to be a color that we want to set essentially permanently, because we can see on the right here that this is purple right now. The underline is caused by the text decoration, and it turns purple because it's a link. So what we've been using throughout this current application is this gray 31, 31, 31. So when we refresh now, it will look like all the others, but it'll still be clickable. So awesome. Now we want to add an on click to this button. We can move over down here and I can explain or clarify the difference. For an A tag, we have an href. And this is a link essentially. For a div has an on-click property. So we can use an on-click and it says a pointing device button has been pressed and released on an element. And that's what onClick means. But I don't want to overcomplicate anything. So our onClick will be anything within this div. So when we hover over this and click on it, it'll be whatever's within here. Okay, so for this portion, we are going to link to Google, and we're basically going to say window, so get our current location within this window. We're going to access the href and just set this to google.com. So www.google.com. We might need to put an HTTP in front of that. Not sure. Yeah. So if we go back now, we do http://google.com, and that's it. So I hope you guys learned a lot from going from part 1 of the design to part 2, coding up most of this, and now part 3, which is going into more detail about responsive coding, the linking for our nav bar, and creating some interesting and cool little transitions on a button that we have. Now, if you have any questions, please let me know. If you like the video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you want to see more, please subscribe. And I'll see you guys in one of my next videos.